Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be listening to us from, here on this big, beautiful planet we call Earth. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio, here on UCY TV Productions, where we strive to ask questions that the mainstream media just doesn't seem to want to ask or would prefer not to ask. Now, today's topic, I think, is going to be one that you'll find very interesting. It's dealing with this level of intense antagonism after the election in November that seems to still be here and is continuing at levels that I've never seen before. I'll try to explain why this is, the psychological reasons behind it. Before I get into that, I would encourage you, if you're listening to the program later, when I put this on YouTube, because you can be listening to this, months from now, if you click on YouTube, please subscribe to my channel, and also check out my website. You can just click right there in the corner where it says "Click here for my official website." And my gosh, I've got articles there, everything from transhumanism to psychopathy, and everything in between. Okay, some people would say they're related. Anyway, what I thought I would bring attention to is this whole thing about why it seems that, well, especially people on the left seem to be really, really, really antagonistic after the election. Now, true, there's conservatives out there that are jerks, okay? And we can explain that in a whole variety of reasons. But what I'd like to do is really emphasize this thing about what seems to be a very common trend right now, and that is a hatred that people on the left are expressing openly towards people, well, even if they're not right-wing, even if they didn't vote for Hillary, okay? And I'm bringing the reason I'm inspired to do this program right now is because I know someone. She lives in Oregon. She is what I would call a social Mormon conservative. In that sense, then she, on some issues she's liberal, and on others she's conservative. But I will note, at least according to the post that she put up on Facebook recently, she was not a Trump supporter. But apparently, her daughters, who expressed, non-support for Hillary in their high school, were verbally assaulted, both of them. And when she uses the words verbally assaulted, I know that does not mean that someone just said, "Oh, you're a dork," and walked on. I mean, this would entail something pretty severe. And I've seen some cases of this out there. I've seen articles about people breaking up, boyfriends and girlfriends, because the girl votes for Trump, and the guy, he was a Hillary supporter. And I've seen articles dealing with vice versa. There one about a woman who's decided to give up relationships because the state of humanity in the United States for them electing Trump is so bad, in her opinion, that she would just rather give up. And I guess that just means if someone did this permanently, I guess that just means getting rid of their genetic legacy, not marrying, not having a family, and so forth. I don't think that I would say that that's kind of counterproductive, ultimately, in that you're not able to then have kids and raise them the way that you would believe in. But why is this? Why is there such an intensity right now? Now, before I get into the psychological reasons, okay, I will note that with social media, things just don't die. I noted this last week's show, that if election, maybe it would have taken place in the year 2000 between Gore and Bush. And there was some emotion there. Not anything compared to this year's. And the thing is that after the election, oh yes, you had lots of people, they were writing articles and stuff and putting them on their blogs back then. Social media was not that big in the year 2000. And I don't know, maybe they're putting things on MySpace or they're sending letters to the editor. But for the most part, after the election and after the recount in Florida and all that kind of stuff, the issue kind of died out. It was like, okay, Bush is the president. Let's just get on with life. But now, with social media, that's not going to happen because everyone's still getting feed that says, oh my gosh, Trump's such an idiot, or something to the effect of, oh, look, Hillary said this, or look what the Democrats, or look what the Republicans. And then we get into kind of a confirmation bias in which people just kind of start getting in their corner, and then their corner starts cheering for them, and pretty soon you're going from, maybe I'll vote for Hillary, I don't know, to suddenly it turns into, my gosh, the Antichrist has defeated the valiant Hillary. Okay? Once people keep on reinforcing the most extreme viewpoints. And the same thing can happen, on the right wing as well. It's a psychological thing. There are some notable differences, though. And there's a talk show host and author, and his name is Dennis Prager. I'm sure many of you have heard of him. And I always found when I got his talk show that he was a very insightful person, extremely insightful. Now, the thing is that he wrote an article that was published recently in the Jewish Journal. And you can look it up. It's a Jewish Journal, November 22nd, 2016. And in it, he's talking about this pattern in which people are, they're maybe canceling going to their parents' house for Thanksgiving because they know their parents voted for Trump. Or, like I said, people breaking up because they find out that, there's a split in the relationship. One person's for Trump and one's for Hillary. And this is actually quite concerning to me. I have friends that are, I have friends of every political persuasion that you can speak of, every religious persuasion you can speak of. And there's a way of speaking to people and also understanding who they are that enables people to get along. And the problem is with the internet, that just does not seem to be something that is the norm. Okay? You want to get all those likes or those upvotes or something like that. So, you're on a forum and you make a statement or on Facebook, and all of a sudden you got all these people liking you and stuff. And you start learning that people ignore the more moderate posts that you make, but the more extreme, whether they be for Hillary or for Trump, the more extreme you make them, the more likes you get, or the more upvotes if you're talking about debates and stuff like that, in newspapers. And this is just going to reinforce this polarization. But anyway, I'd like to kind of explain something here, that I'd like to look over some of the stuff that he has written, and I find some of it, very, very little of it I don't agree with. For the most part, I agree with it, and I'll try to paraphrase some of the things he brings up here and discuss it in more detail. But before I begin, I will state that one of the things whenever I like reading both sides of issues. So, I'm the kind of person that, even though I'm religious, I made it a point when I was in college to read Origin of the Species and Descent of Man. Those two really famous books from Charles Darwin. And I like to read stuff that is, things that on the other side. Maybe that started when I was like 13 and I was reading the Communist Manifesto. Got my hands on that and read that. But the thing is that To the left, and this is a major difference between the left and the right, unless the right wing is in some way motivated by religion, because then there's kind of a sinners versus saints. But most of those people that feel that way don't usually get involved in politics. They have their viewpoints and they may express them, but they don't get involved in the process, because obviously if they're a fundamentalist and suddenly they're in a political situation in which they're having to cooperate and work with people who might be, I don't know, Mormons or something, then it turns into arguing religion, and feelings get hurt, and a lot of times people just kind of stay in their own bubbles. But the thing is that the left tends to have a view that the personal is political. Okay, that's a very, very common phrase I heard amongst left people when I went to college, and that was the personal is political. And what that means is that your personality, who you are, will reflect your politics. That means that if someone, now to a degree that's correct, actually, but I'm not going to really deal so much with that, except for the fact that if you believe that a person's personality and who they are is being expressed through their politics, then that means you can judge them. And instead of just judging their politics, instead of being able to say, I really disagree with you for being a Republican. Instead, if the personal is political, then you can't have that duality. I like you despite you being Republican. It turns into, I don't like you because you're Republican. Okay? Keep that in mind. All right? That the person will not separate it to where they can say, I will like you because, we get along, despite you being Republican. It turns into, I hate you because you are Republican. And the thing is that this is way more common amongst the left, because I think sometimes, I'm going to get into these points here because I'm kind of giving it away, but the thing is that often the left is not religious. And you can argue this up, down, and sideways, but you keep coming to the point that human beings need something that connects them to something bigger than what they are. So if you get rid of religion, or you become very secular in your religious attitudes to where, you believe in God, and you might even believe in the Bible, but you really, you don't want to have that dictating your political stands and viewpoints, then you need something, since now you've relegated this to a corner, you need something that you can hold on to that will give you a sense of identity. Okay? And no, I'm not going to get into identity politics so much. But the thing is, there's a whole school of that. The thing is that when you then have people on the right, often they have their churches, their civic organizations, their business organizations, etc., and their families for that matter. I know right-wing people who are very not religious at all, but they're really into their families. Okay? They really, really, really are into their families. So there's something big there, something bigger. But a lot of times left people are more likely not to be married, more likely not to have a family, less likely to be involved in organized religion in a devout manner. They may be members, but they're not terribly devout. So therefore, there is a cavity left in them, a void, in which many times their politics comes in. The same way as you might have like a 45-year-old woman who's never married, doesn't have any kids, but she still has those kind of maternal feelings. She might, again, this is very cliche, but she might buy herself 5 or 6 cats. She needs something to fulfill those instincts. And the same is true politically with many people. They need some politics to fill that void, and therefore the personal becomes very political. Now, saying that, let's get into what Mr. Prager is saying here. Now, there are now he says this, and he says something that, okay, I'm going to skip number 1 there because I don't want to deal with meanness, people on the left or right or whatever. The one thing, and this is actually true, I believe, because I just now mentioned it, and that is, he brings up in his point number 2, that right-wing people tend to read both sides to issues more than left-wing do. And one of the very crucial aspects of analysis is that you need to be able to understand your opponent in order to really understand your own position. And the thing is, a lot of conservatives that I know, including myself, either A, started out as liberal and then became conservative, so they know both sides, or they try to read what is being said and try to at least understand their opponents. Now, I'm not saying all left-wing people don't. I'm saying that many don't. In fact, a much higher percentage than right-wing people. And the thing is that this means that you will get more of this perceptional bias and confirmation bias taking place amongst the left. I've seen this in political forums in which I've visited many forums. And the conservative ones, you will see debates, lively debates between conservatives, okay? Because they have disagreements on this issue or that issue or whatever. But on liberal forums, I've noticed that you're very likely that you may agree with the liberal platform 90%, okay, 90%. But because you take a stand on one issue that is different, let's say you're liberal all the way, except you don't believe in abortion, or you're liberal all the way, but you believe that, Israel has a right to exist, or something like that, and you'll get banned from forums really quick. I've seen that. Liberal people get banned on liberal forums, or really shot down, almost like walking into a religious service and saying, I don't believe this. Well, of course, you're going to be shot down if you're in the middle of a religious service. However, the left is way more likely, again, to treat this as a religion. And therefore, you become a heretic really fast. Now, of course, what's worse is the person who's conservative. All of a sudden, they're evil, monsters, unenlightened, bigoted, racist, all these other things, even though the person may never have ever said anything bigoted or racist or whatever. They just are because they are. And that is more of a tenet of a religion. I would actually say a religious cult than it is, sincere dialogue. And so, this is something that's actually quite worrisome, and I would hope that we could get to a point where people can kind of see both sides, but right now, ooh, ouch. Anyway, again, and he goes in number 3, I've said this already, most left-wing positions are deeply emotion-based. Now, I'll give you an example here. Now, I actually know some vegans that are very conservative. Okay, they're very, very conservative politically, except they are vegans. But I've noticed that with vegans, though, if you bring up anything, let's say you say something about, well, I believe that there should be safeguards for livestock so that they're not mistreated in factory farms. The vegan person will say, well, you're still supporting evil because you're saying that we should raise animals and kill them. And you're saying, well, yeah, but, people are going to still eat meat, and then they'll shut you off and say, no, but that's evil. They shouldn't do that. It's wrong. And you're saying, and the thing is, you can't have a dialogue in that issue with people. And many of these other issues that the left has, they tend to be able to say, if you disagree with me, you're therefore a bad person, and therefore you are all, fill in the blanks, all the words that can be used to level against you. I recently read where an entertainer was really upset that Hillary lost, and she blamed women. And she said, well, it's because women hate women. Okay, women hate women, and that explains why they voted for Trump. That only makes sense in the context. She tried to use some psychology and something, but that only makes sense in the context of a religious statement. Okay, and where you have, what is it, that quote from Star Wars? Only a Sith sees things. I'm paraphrasing this, in either black or white or extremes or something like that. And yeah, it is kind of a religious viewpoint, the right and wrong, and not being able to see the gray areas. And when you do that, that gets dangerous, because then you start, then that's when you start getting witch trials and stuff like that. Now, this is an interesting aspect I hadn't thought about too much. On number 5, he points out that the left associates human decency not so much with personal integrity as having correct, i.e., progressive political positions. And then he goes on to say, therefore, if you don't hold such positions, you lack decency. Now, that is, again, that goes into this, what I've been talking about, that the personal is political. If I have someone who might cheat, I have a guy here, one guy who cheats on his girlfriend and shoplifts, but yet he holds those views that are consistent with left-wing politics. I'm not saying left-wing people are going out doing that. I'm saying, let's take this as a hypothetical example. He, cheats on his girlfriend and he shoplifts. And next to him is, I don't know, some guy who's a leader of the college Republicans or something like that. And he never would do anything like that to his girlfriend, and he would never steal. But if a lot of left people will listen to both of them make a statement, and they'll believe that the conservative guy is evil. Just because of his stance. He's not a decent person, because he holds those views, and he should know better, because he should be educated. And you see, that's one of the things. We joke about re-education camps. I've never heard of a conservative regime, that had re-education camps. Now, maybe some out there, I don't know. But I've heard re-education camps associated with all communist regimes. And, people on the left saying, well, we just need to re-educate people. And that implies that the more education you have, the more decent you will become. Because obviously, you'll come over. You will convert. Note that I'm using religious terms here. You'll convert. And you will be able to be part of the decent community. Okay, I've actually, think about this. There's people that are serious in the urban areas of California, Los Angeles and San Francisco primarily, who are really serious about wanting to split that chunk of, they want to take all of California, but I don't think people in San Diego and Bakersfield would be very appreciative of it, and certainly not the ones that live in the rural communities in Central California, Bakersfield, Fresno, those kinds of areas, or out in the desert communities. but they actually would like to split California away from the United States. Because they feel like, well, we don't want to be with those guys. There's always a really hardcore Southerner who's like, I think we should go back to the Confederacy and split up. But usually that's kind of like when they've had a little bit to drink and they're spouting off something. These guys are deadly serious that want to break away from the United States and form their own country, so to speak. So, think about that for a moment. They're not doing it because they're not wanting to do this so they can have their own country and call it liberal stand or something like that. They don't really feel comfortable with the rest of the country. I think a lot of the times they don't really interact with people in the rest of the country. Okay? I mean, you can look at the most conservative part of America there is. That's Utah. But most of the male population that's Mormon has gone on missions where they've been out and they've had to encounter people of all religious persuasions, many times thinking, you're going to hell for being a Mormon, and all political persuasions. And the thing is, I've never seen them say, well, we should just kick California off. I don't see conservative people out there saying we should just throw California, maybe New York as well, out of the United States. But there's people in those communities that are deadly serious about let's break the country up. And that's because of the decency thing. Number 6, he deals with the whole religious thing. We've already gone through that. So the thing is that these points that are brought up here and the other things I've pointed out can really explain a lot of what's going on right now. Now, my personal opinion, I'd love to see an episode of, I've only watched a couple episodes of it, Naked and Afraid. You stick some lady there that's like a Trump supporter and a guy who's like a total, Hillary supporter, and put them in the jungle naked for a month and see what would happen. That could be quite interesting. But I think ultimately, this is a very ironic thing. Most firemen and policemen are Republicans, or they tend to vote for the conservative candidates. And I've seen that. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. But generally, that's what I've seen expressed in polling and stuff like that. Now, I have never heard of a policeman or a fireman who would say, I'm just going to let your house burn down. Because this is the headquarters of such and such left-wing organization. No, they go in there and they fix it. And I think, let's say you have a doctor who's a hardcore left-wing person. I've never heard of a doctor saying, I'm not going to help that person because he's a Republican. And this is what we have to have in our society. We have to have people who can have discourse with each other. Look up the video that Jonathan Pye did. Just look up Jonathan Pye, the reason why Trump won. And he's not a Trump supporter, okay? Far from it. But he's very emphatic that you're not going to get people to come over to your side if you're insulting them all the time. And in fact, you might, just my own personal view, if you keep telling someone that they're a fascist, they might become a fascist. Okay? And that's dangerous. We don't want to split the country apart. We need to have discourse. We need to have, a situation where, like Oregon, you go to a hot spring and you've got like 7 or 8 people that are left-wing, sitting naked in a pool, discussing with 7 or 8 naked conservatives, about issues. Okay, and I think that's the way we need to have it. I'm going to deal with Freud here for just a second, but Sigmund Freud, in his work Civilization and Its Discontents, he does a lot of analysis on why people have the political viewpoints they do. He does a lot of analysis on why society has to be, basically everyone kind of treating themselves decently. I don't know if this is where this quote came from, but there's a Freud quote that says civilization started when someone decided to use words instead of a rock to get their way. And I'm not even really quite sure where Freud's political views are or were. I've read Civilization's Discontents. He seems to have kind of a negative view towards humanity in a large degree, thinks that we're all on the verge of killing each other unless we keep people, repressing their instincts, and you got to keep that guilt up so they won't do things that are bad to one another. In that sense, he's kind of a Hobbesian. But at the same time, his views were quite conservative, and that's why a lot of times, I had a conversation with someone recently. They were left-wing, and they made a comment. We were in a little discussion group, and they made a comment, and they said, well, Freud's views have all been discounted. And I just said, oh, which ones? He was dumbfounded. He was like, this is something he just heard. All Freud's views are discounted. And then, you ask, well, which ones? And there's no response. It's like if I had someone that was the head of a sperm bank, and I were to say, oh, yeah, there's no such thing as eugenics. I guarantee, well, I can't guarantee it, but I'll bet you they would look at you and kind of look at you funny, kind of like, what? I mean, in the sense that, I'm not saying that the society, it's kind of interesting, it's usually left-wing utopians who supported eugenics. Let's make a better humanity through selective breeding. It was usually left-wing. Look it up. There may be a possible exception of someone like Teddy Roosevelt. He seemed to be pretty conservative. But the thing is that, the idea that, well, if you're going to have great kids, you should start out with great genetics. And in that sense, try going to a sperm bank. Try going to a sperm bank and, say, well, I've got these genetic problems and I'm not terribly smart, but I'd like to donate to help people have kids. I don't think you're going to get any takers. Okay? And it may sound unfair, but that's just the way it is. Okay? We have a society that everything has to be fair. And I'm sorry, not everything is fair. All right? It would be great if it was. It would be great if the person that works the hardest made the most money. But we know for a fact that many of the people that wind up with money are people that are quite lazy. And they come up with some gimmick. Or maybe they're born into wealth. Or something like that. Now, of course, someone will say, well, see, that proves that we need to have fairness. We need to make it fair. So, yeah, let's take a look at the guy who just had some stupid gimmick and wound up rich. Well, what do? Do you say, okay, well, what about the guy that worked his tail off and gave up all his free time and became a doctor? Or the woman who created a business? Or whatever? And say that, well, let's take some of their stuff and give it to people who didn't do those things. You see, it would feel good if everyone had the same wealth, but do you get it by taking wealth from those who have and giving it to those who don't? Or do you have it by encouraging an economy? And see, now I'm getting on a conservative economic thing, and I don't want to really go that direction right now. But the thing is, that is one of the things that you will hear, often said by people on the left, is we have to have things fair. Conservatives will say, well, we need to have it fair in the sense that you don't make laws that discriminate against people, and you don't hinder people's progress. Whereas the left will tend to look and say, well, look, there's a neighborhood over there, they have lots of money. There's a neighborhood over there, they don't have very much money. Let's redistribute. Without looking at why that one neighborhood may have the money and the other one doesn't. And without maybe creating more opportunities. And again, you can talk about this, but a lot of times people, on the extreme left won't listen. But I would say this. I would say maybe the people that are at the extreme, super extreme, left, who are, breaking up with people, who are, saying the newspaper editor should be fired because she wrote something that was negative towards whatever political viewpoint they had. It may be about 10% of these people who are the very vocal ones. Maybe throw in 20% more, or maybe more. Let's pretend it's 50. Let's pretend 50% of the people who consider themselves, let's say, liberal Democrats in the United States are these kind of people that we've discussed, where the personal is political. It's somewhat of a religious philosophy. That still leaves 50% that aren't, who maybe are voting because they feel like, well, these people didn't get an even break. So this person that's from the left is saying, let's do something about it. Maybe they're disenchanted with our foreign policy or our corporations getting everything. Ironically, the right wing feels the same way, usually on these issues. But the thing is that we need to reach out and talk to people, bridge the gap. Now, you may not convert this person. You may meet someone and, they're from the left, and, maybe the best you'll ever get is someone who might go out and play basketball with you once in a while or go fishing with you. But they may never change their policies. And there's some people that get married. You got a left-wing person, right-wing person, they get married, and, everything's fine. They're able to look past it. I've known people that are like super religious and they marry atheists. And they have a pretty good marriage. I guess they just don't talk about those issues with the kids. But the thing is that we need to have this kind of dialogue, or else we're going to see a situation where we're going to see, the situation like that's in the Middle East, where you have this ethnic group or this religious group, and they hold grudges that go back generations, and there's no way they want to get along with each other. We don't want that for the United States, okay? I certainly don't. I know that most people that listen here do not want that. So that means we need to understand how this works. We need to try to talk to one another at this level and try to find some common grounds. And it's not impossible. And who knows, you may convert people over to your way of thinking. Okay? I've known some people. Some of the most religious people I know are people that started out as atheists. Okay? So, it's just like some of the most anti-smokers are people that used to be chain smokers. It happens. It happens quite a bit of times. It's very frequent. And, you don't just put yourself in a bubble. Okay? Anyway, if you get a chance to, go back, read that article in the Jewish Journal from Mr. Prager. He takes different aspects of what we've talked about, but he's got some good points there. He explains it in different ways than I do, and you should check it out. Anyway, I started out with this whole thing about the things that the mainstream media would just rather not talk about. And you know what? I just got back from the mall. Now, it is before Christmas at the time of this recording, and there's a lot of people out there shopping. But I'll say this, that this is pertinent to any time of the year. Christmas there's just more of it. There's higher levels of guilt on people to buy lots and lots of things. But ultimately, this is kind of an addition to a show I did a couple years ago, and it was called Don't Allow Yourself to Be a Sacrifice for Consumerism. And if we think of the old days, when, you had certain cultures that had religious rites, and people would actually, it wasn't always forced, many cultures, people would actually accept being made a sacrifice, literal sacrifice, or they would actually volunteer to be a sacrifice. And, they'd march up those long steps of the pyramid. And often they did come from, the upper class, hence sacrifice. Of course, many of these societies would go out and round up people, and they were sacrificed in the hundreds or the thousands. But the special sacrifices were the ones who did it completely voluntarily. And they would march up there and they would lay down on that altar while the priest, or, in some societies, a priestess would raise that knife and come down and finish that person off. I'm sure this has happened ever since way back in history. Way back in history. And, it's kind of funny. I have a new book coming out called The Destiny of Our Past that is set during the times of Noah. And, the idea being that this was a very advanced society, a society that is comparable, if not more advanced than today, that was destroyed by the flood. Now, whether you believe in the flood or not, or something in between, that's not the point I'm trying to make. I am saying, though, that people have employed sacrifice in religion throughout all of history. Sometimes people, sometimes animals, sometimes grain, just something that means something to them. But we've sort of made it to where now we sacrifice our time and our talents and our aspirations in life, if we count those aspirations as being the normal, traditional goals in life, marriage, family, and so forth. We are sacrificing all those things in the name of consumerism. Okay? I know that sounds like, oh man, is this going to be something like hippies or something like that? No. Consumerism was actually something that was condemned 100 years ago when it was first starting to take effect. When people like Edward Bernays and others started this whole concept that we sell people the idea of buying things to make themselves feel better. Not buying things because you need them, not buying a pair of pants because you've got a hole in the pair of pants you have for work, but buying it just because it makes you feel better. And we have conditioned our society to believe that, even if your pants look perfectly fine, they're not even faded, that if they're out of style, if the new style for this year says that you're going to be an outsider if you don't wear that new style, you toss those pants in the garbage or give them away. And this is true for our entire society. We have a throwaway society where, sometimes you buy these things at certain stores, I won't name which ones, but, you assemble something like a kitchen or, it says, well, maybe you're tired of that one, get rid of it and get a new one and stuff. We don't buy things anymore because we need it, and we don't buy things because we want to have it 20 years from now. We buy things because we've been conditioned to do so. So when I came into that mall, I saw people walking around, and I'm not joking, okay? I am not joking. They were walking around like they were in a daze, okay? I've been to nightclubs before, and if you're at a nightclub where it's very fast-paced, and, people have really gotten into the music, at around maybe 1 or 2 o'clock, they're all sweaty. This is even if they're not drinking. They're all sweaty, and they have this kind of look about them, like they're totally caught up in the music. I've been to hippie gatherings where people are dancing to those drum beats, and it's like they're in a trance because maybe they've been doing it for an hour, 2, 3 hours, and they just kind of lose themselves. And you can see it in their eyes. It takes a while for them to recover. But I also was seeing that look today when I was at the mall. People walking around with this glazed look about them. Okay? This kind of, this sensory overload of all of the imagery and the other people, and this consumeristic frenzy to buy more and more and more. And a lot of it is fueled by guilt. Guilt is a very major component of many religions. Yeah, it keeps you in check when no one's looking. But this guilt is fueled by the idea that if you don't buy the right thing for your husband, your wife, your kids, your grandma, whatever, then you're unworthy. And they're going to have that same feeling too. And if you get something you don't like, whereas you gave something really good to that other significant other in your life, you're going to feel angry. Admit it. You're going to feel let down. Even though maybe they bought that with the best intentions. There's a part of you, you'll put that smile on your face and say thank you. And then you'll put it, whatever it is, away in the attic for a while, or you might not even unwrap it, and eventually it gets given away to Goodwill in the future, or put up in a garage sale. The thing is that we have got caught up in this so much, and we go out and we watch, let's just say even going out. We sit at home. We watch television. Television tells us that we're not good enough. We're shown that if you do this, or you don't do this, or you don't buy this, that you can't compensate for your weakness. You can't compensate for your deficiencies. So you'll be spotted out in public. And so therefore, you need to do it. You need to buy it. And we're conditioned that way. You watch mainstream news programs. They tell you about how awful the world is. And then you get these commercials on TV that they might start out with something, filled with anxiety and fear. And then you buy it. You're more likely to, because it relieves you subconsciously. You live in a horrible world. You look horrible. You don't measure up. You don't have as much. You need to buy this. You need to consume. You need to sacrifice the hours you spent at work in order to compensate. You may not even have the money, so you pull out that plastic and you run up that tab, and, your sacrifice is in the future. And I tend to think actually about the concept of what our economy would be like if people only bought maybe not their house or something like that, because it would take you a long time to save up for that. Maybe even take a long time to save up for a car. But what if everything else we bought with cash, immediately, not credit? Okay? And then we try to keep in mind that when we work, that's hours spent. We sacrifice when we go to work. We sacrifice the 8 hours or whatever you work of time that is an opportunity cost, something you could have done otherwise. And then you get this money as a reward. Of course, the government yanks a bunch of it out. But what you're left over with, you go out and you sacrifice it. And you're probably thinking, but I need to buy clothes. I need to buy food. I need to buy all these other things. Yes, you do. Okay? You need to buy stuff. But I think many times we overdo it. We buy things that we don't need with money that we actually don't have. And then we wonder why we're not happy. Well, maybe if I buy some more stuff, I'll be happy. Maybe if I have a better car, I'll be happy. You know that's not the case. And you can go look out at a high school parking lot filled with hundreds of cars driven by students. Most of those cars are used cars, and they were bought by people who were trying, they had all of this pride in their, oh, this is my car, and maybe now I'll have what I need, and it'll be so wonderful, and it'll compensate for whatever, is bothering me. And now a high school student drives around, probably, maybe jacks up the wheels or does other things with it. But this is really what consumerism is all about. Now, in a traditional society, you send your daughter, in one of these societies, like, there's a bunch of them. I'm not going to name any by name, but they're out there, and very advanced ones too. You march your daughter up. You send her off with the priest, and they march her up, and she might be looking forward to this. March her up to the altar. She lays there on the altar. The priest plunges the knife into her, pulls the heart out. It's still beating for a second. The gods are really overjoyed. Probably the crowds are like in awe, and so forth. Now, what do we sacrifice nowadays? I was reading an article a while back about Italians who have one of the lowest birth rates in the world. And they interviewed young women. And these young women were saying, you know what? I think I would rather, be able to buy shoes and use fashionable clothes than to get pregnant and have children. So they're caught up in this, like, oh my gosh, it's so wonderful going out with my new clothes and my new this and my new that and my designer handbag that might cost, I don't know, in U.S. dollars might cost $3,000-$4,000. Now, the couple that lived in this ancient civilization, they probably have other children. I hate to say it, but they probably do. So they at least carry on their family line. They have this sense that they are now closer to God. Now, I disagree with human sacrifice, okay? I'm not trying to promote it, even though in my sci-fi book, there's a lot of it. Again, it's during the times of Noah. But the thing is that they at least would have felt like they were doing something of a more esoteric or spiritual manner. Horrible as it sounds, they would have felt this way. Now, what are the women in Italy going to be thinking in the future? The handbag is probably going to eventually, I don't care if it costs several $1,000s, it's going to be out of style. It's going to wear out, whatever. It's going to be in, I've been to Rome many times. They have some really cool secondhand stores there, where you can go in and buy stuff. And the thing is, these were things that maybe in the 80s or 90s would have been like, whoa, this is high fashion. Now they're just there on the rack, and you can pick them up for a very low price. And this is what young people who won't be young forever, okay? If you're in your 20s, you're not going to be in your 20s that much longer. If you're in your 30s, you're not going to be in your 30s much longer. I'll tell you this much. When I was, was I even in my 20s at the time? I don't remember. But I remember there was a show that was on. I was at least in my early 20s, if I was in my 20s. There was a show on called 30-something. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's so far in the future. And then I became 30-something. And then when I hit 40, it was like, oh my gosh, now I'm past 30-something. The thing is, you will advance in age. What will you have for it? Okay? What will you have for it? Most people, their childbearing years after 40 are over. Men, of course, can have kids when they're past 40, but most people marry people that are about the same age. With men, maybe a couple years younger. But most men are not Donald Trump, okay? He's like 70 years old, and he has a 10-year-old son. Most men don't do that. Most women are unable to have kids when they hit their 40s. And so, despite what some movie star that's going to some doctor and getting all this special treatment, they can have kids. Sure. I mean, I know someone actually decided she was going to have another kid when she was in her 40s. And, oh gosh, she was like 45, but she was pumped through so many hormones, that finally her ovaries gasped out an egg and it fertilized and she did have a child. But again, medical intervention. What are you going, if you give up in your 20s and 30s, if you give up the opportunity to have the children that you really desire because you were too busy doing other things because your consumeristic society says this is what's important. Family comes second. Religion comes, well, don't even worry about religion. Mainstream media mocks it. Maybe because religion goes against the idea of consumerism. So maybe it's not so political. Maybe part of it is an antagonism because of economics. Because if everyone was suddenly very traditional, very religious, I mean traditional in the sense that maybe they're not religious, but they're very traditional, this would actually hurt the economy. Single people or double income people with no kids spend a lot more money on trips. And by the way, they use a lot more resources, and their so-called carbon footprint is way in excess of families. Okay, but they're a corporate dream. Single people work longer hours. They buy more stuff. They're like worker bees in a hive. But consumerism promotes this, and ultimately, I think when we sacrifice ourselves for consumerism, we are actually sacrificing our future. Because if all you're really zeroing in on is materialism and consumerism and that sort of thing, then who's having the children? Who's carrying on the culture? Consumerism itself is actually sort of like a cancer in a body. Okay? It actually kills the body that it's in eventually. Because eventually, aside from just the lack of any kind of feeling of connectiveness that consumerism promotes, it reduces birth rates, and sometimes to the birth rates down to nothing. And therefore, like in the case of, you look at Italy or Japan, where the birth rate is so freaking low, that's the end of those cultures. Given, a couple generations, that's it. And, think about that sometime. This sacrifice just to have more goodies is actually sacrificing our future. Anyway, that's all the time we have now. I'm thankful that you tuned in, and I hope you'll come back next week for another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions.
Hey, this is JJ Inc., and when I'm on planet Earth, I listen to UCY.TV.